Final Fight CD for the Sega CD, because it's on a CD. That's why there's a CD in the title. Ah, those Sega fellows. They were always so clever. That's why they're no longer making video game hardware. That's actually quite depressing, to be honest with you. Let's move on to something a little more positive, like how Sega CD owners got a good conversion of Final Fight on their Sega Genesis add-on of choice, thus proving that the Sega CD wasn't just a thing where you played crap interactive movies and Sonic CD, but that's besides the point. The point is, well, it's Final Fight on the Sega CD. I believe I just said that a couple times already. In any case, if you've never played or even heard of Final Fight before, it is a side-scrolling beat-em-up classic arcade game from Capcom where you beat the crap out of people with various punches, kicks, and assorted weapons. The game gives you 3 playable characters to choose from: Cody, Guy, and Hagar, the city mayor whose daughter was kidnapped, and thus he decided to take matters into his own hands because unlike the great majority of city mayors, Mike Hagar isn't a pussy. Nor is he corruptible, but that's besides the point. Final Fight CD is a game that is as close to arcade perfect as you could get back in 1993. And indeed, while Super Nintendo owners got a nerfed, sanitized edition on their console of choice, Final Fight CD is virtually unchanged from the arcade original, save for a couple of minor and one not so minor differences. The not so minor difference is what you're hearing in the gameplay footage, barely. The CD quality remixed music tracks, which I didn't like at first, but it did grow on me after a while. In a manner of speaking, I'd say that out of all the versions of Final Fight that I've played or seen, I happen to like Final Fight CD's remixed tracks a hell of a lot because it does give the game a much different feel compared to the original arcade soundtrack or the subsequent conversions on other consoles. Even the music on the recent Final Fight Double Impact release on Xbox Live or PSN doesn't hold a candle to this soundtrack. It really is that good, and of course, there's all the sound effects and voice bites ripped from the arcade game, along with some top-notch voice acting for the introductory cutscene.
You son of a... What have you done to her?
Okay, it's not great, but it's better than that FMV garbage. Graphics-wise, Final Fight CD is almost a dead ringer for the arcade original, practically pixel perfect in some respects as far as sprite size, detail, and even the heads-up display is pretty much ripped from the arcade game. Obviously, due to the limited color palette of the Sega Genesis hardware, the game does look a tad faded, and there are some bits of graininess here and there, most notably in the health meters of certain bosses. But even then, Final Fight CD looks pretty damn good, all things considered. Clearly one of the better examples of a game developer making full use of the Sega CD capabilities to create something great rather than, well, whatever shovelware was shoveled onto the Sega CD over the years. As far as the gameplay goes, well, it's Final Fight. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you beat people up, you find weapons scattered about, food in trash cans and stack of tires that somehow restore health, and generally become a public nuisance. Control is simple. One button attacks, the other jumps, and you could assign a button to execute a life-draining special attack that can also be done by pressing the other 2 buttons together. Generally speaking, this isn't such a complicated game. It's pretty simple fare for the most part, but still challenging fare as you attempt to fight off gang members ganging up on you and their rather high stamina meters. The game runs at a rather solid pace, but there is the occasional bout of slowdown that occurs when things get a bit too hectic. But one thing that is quick in Final Fight CD is the loading. Sure, there is a notable lag in between levels, but it's brief enough that it's barely noticeable, and it doesn't break the overall flow of the game, it just goes from one point to another. There's not much in terms of extras in Final Fight CD aside from the ability to choose your skill level of difficulty, your starting lives, and how many points you need to earn more lives. In addition to the main game, there's also a time attack mode where you're basically beating up more mad gears in the time allotted. It's not much, but it is something different, and they do introduce new locales to the game which look as though they could easily fit in with the rest of the game. Forgot to talk about control. Control's fine. Responsive, not too laggy, works well enough, can't complain. For a time up until the recent crop of compilations and emulated versions were made available to the masses, Final Fight CD was the definitive version of the game to get. And, if nothing else, the closest to playing the arcade game in its purest form at home. Sure, there were fewer colors, some minor graphical and name changes were made, but the rest of the game was intact, with all the levels included and the 2-player function that was missing from the competitor's iteration of the same game. On a system dominated by shoddy full-motion video games and high-end role-playing games requiring expensive RAM cartridges, Final Fight CD is one of the rare gems on the Sega CD that resembled a video game you could pick up and play. And even though there are recent releases that do a better job of bringing the arcade game home, there's a certain charm and feel to Final Fight CD that the other versions cannot match, and that alone makes it a worthwhile addition to any Sega CD collection.